Hello, my name is Chris Keyack with Keyack Technology Solutions. In this video today, I'm going to talk a little bit about Tekla Erection Drawing or General Arrangement Drawing settings. And I'm going to be showing things a little bit differently than the out-of-the-box settings that are in the USA environment and the steel detailing role. Now, what I'm going to be doing is a little bit more of a slant towards miscellaneous steel detailers. So detailers that do stairs and rails. And there's a strategy that I use with them, and I'm actually showing you a setup that I did with a client. There's a strategy that's a little bit different than the out-of-the-box settings. Now, one thing I do want to say is that this is not a full-on training video of how to do every one of the steps. This is showing the results and kind of some of the background process of the strategy behind how I set this client up. And so it kind of gives you an idea of a direction that you can go to accomplish the needs that you're looking for. Now, to get started, I'm going to focus on creating some drawings for this specific stair in the overall model. So what I've done is I've already created some views here in the view list, and I'm going to open up Stair 1 plan at the ground level, and then I also have another view at the second floor or level 2. Now what you'll see here is that when I close down the view list, it's showing the entire model for these views. And really what I'm going to do is a partial plan of just this specific stair in this specific area. Now this model isn't perfect. It was actually just a test and training model. So don't judge me necessarily on all of the details of what you're seeing here, like with the slabs and stuff, but it shows you the concepts. So let's go ahead and go up here to the view menu, and we're first going to change the work area. So I typically like to adjust my work area in the model. You can absolutely do it in the drawings later, but there's a reason with grid dimensions and stuff that I actually try to do this beforehand. So I'm actually just going to fit my work area to the area related to this stair, and you'll see that it hides the rest of the stuff in the model and just focuses on this particular area. Now I'm going to also go over here to my stair at ground level, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to come up here to work area using 2 points, and I'm just going to fit around that specific area. Now, the view at the ground level is created at the 100-foot elevation. And you'll actually see here, if I compare this to the other views, I'll just tile vertically, you'll see that in the level 2, which is at the 115-foot level, we can see that the stair is coming down, and then we can see the landing, and then it goes downward to the ground. In the ground view here at the left, we've got the basically this lower stair flight is actually coming up from the ground, going to the landing, and then it would go up. And I've actually changed my view depth here specifically to show sort of like a partial flight of the stairs. So that way I'm going to have 2 flights here, one showing from the ground coming up to the landing, and then the second one here is actually coming from the second floor down to the landing. So that's something to just keep in mind, is that you can actually control your view depths to show partial plans or different levels of plans for stairs. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind, is a little bit different in Tekla than say in AutoCAD. Now I've got basically those work areas fit there, and I'm all set to go ahead and start creating my erection drawing. To create my erection drawing, I'll go to Drawings and Reports, and I'll go to the Create GA Drawing button here. Now, I'm going to select the 2 views that I'd like to add to this erection drawing. And so I'm going to then go to Drawing Properties, and let me show you the strategy of what I've done here. Now, if you look at the Tekla settings that are out of the box, such as Plan and Elevation, let's actually select Plan, for instance, and load that up. You're going to see here that underneath this Edit Settings or Object Level Settings, there's a bunch of specific filters or object level setting rules that have been set up here at the drawing level. The only problem with this is that if everything is just going to be done on this main plan view, then you're all good. But if you start cutting sections and additional views that have different properties on this plan drawing, well, the thing is you're going to be struggling with some sort of like conflicting information happening between these drawing level object level settings versus what's actually getting passed down into the views. And that actually messes people up and they get really confused. So one strategy here is that you can actually create drawing settings that don't have any object level settings at the top level in the drawing. And so that's actually what I did here. So I've created this, the customer was actually creating lots of different drawing settings, and they were getting really messed up with this because they do lots of different types of views on the same drawing. And so what I did is I just made a generic SI, erection drawing, and that's what they do all their original drawings from. And so I'll load that up. Now, here's just a neat little trick and strategy. I tend to use plus in front of all my naming conventions. So that way, like for instance, this is the customer's company name initials, SI. All right, so I did plus SI. And the reason why I do that SI prefix is so that way all of their settings appear near each other because it's in alphabetical order. I did the plus because the letter S would actually appear down here on the bottom, just like you can see one of their older settings, and I don't like that. I want everything up at the top. So I just did the plus there so that way I can organize all of their settings at the beginning. Then I do all capitals with their company initials and then underscore, and then have the list of the drawing settings that I want there. Okay, so the other strategy that I've done here is not only did I make this just general erection drawing setting, I actually saved it away as standard as well. So a lot of times when new users, when they're making drawings, they forget to load up specific settings. They forget to come in here, load, and then change the things that they want. So rather than the user having to come in here and load this up, I actually just saved everything away as standard. So it's exactly the same settings here. And whenever you have something saved away as standard in your firm folder or your model folder, what's going to happen is whenever you open that model, if you don't load and apply anything else, then standard is what's going to be loaded and applied by default. And that's exactly what I want in case they forget to do that. So I'm going to, in this case here, just go ahead and set the basically the sheet number that's going to appear in the title block. And then I'm going to go ahead and put in Stair 1 plan drawing. Okay, I'll apply those settings and press OK. I always check this checkbox here to open the drawing before I create it, and then I'll say create. Okay, so once the drawing opens up, I want to just double click on the background and again remind everybody that I do not have any object level settings happening here in the drawing level. So this is completely empty here, and I've got this set to blank. Now, what I did do is I changed what the customer wanted here, where they tend to show the profile and then the piece mark oftentimes in their plan views. And so that's what I actually set up here at the drawing level in the part mark. So the strategy here is that if I'm not doing any object level settings, you'll see that pretty much everything on the drawing is going to get the same style of part mark, which I have the profile, then I have like a carriage return or the enter key or return key on your keyboard, and then I've got a frame here around the assembly mark. And that's exactly what I'm seeing. And I'm seeing it for concrete, I'm seeing it for stair pans, this is a field fabricated stair, so that's why we're seeing it this way. And then I'm seeing it also for the rail as well as the stair stringers. Okay, so basically everything is kind of popping in here the same exact way. Now, what I tend to do is at the drawing level, I try to tell people, hey, let's make things look the 80 or 90% rule, right? So I want to make things look as much as possible to what you commonly do for most of the drawing, and that's exactly what I've set up here. Same thing on the part level. So you have to determine whether or not you want to draw things as symbol. So if I say modify, that's going to just show the center line, which that's typically what you're going to see on structural steel, like on a structural floor plan. But on miscellaneous steel, you're not really going to do things usually that way. So I tend to do the exact. Now, there's going to be a lot of hidden lines and things in here. So you may determine to turn certain hidden lines on or off, which is what these controls are doing here, and say modify. And you can also control whether center lines are going to be turned on and off. And you can say modify. So that actually looks a little bit cleaner, but I'm often careful with that at first, just because it might be hiding things that I don't want to be hidden. And again, I'm not trying to do this across the whole board here. Maybe I just want to control the center lines and hidden lines on certain parts. So the key thing here to understand is that the strategy of what I've done is I did not set any object level settings, and I just set the 80% rule here of how I want things to be presented on the part mark level and on the part level. One other thing that I commonly do with clients is on bolts. So I'll go to bolt mark. You can actually see here that I've got some bolt properties. And let's see if I can easily grab some bolts that I've got shown here. This actually doesn't have a lot of bolts because I am dealing with a pan stair, but I do have one bolt here. So let me just say add mark using view properties. And so you'll actually see here that I've got a bolt mark that I can turn on because I've got the properties here. But on the general tab, I've actually told Tekla on the drawing level not to turn on the marks by default. Whereas on part mark, for instance, I've got the part marks to be on and distributed, which means that it's going to show it in at least one view, the part marks, and I want those on by default. But for the bolt marks, because I don't want a chia pet, or a Christmas tree of lots of different, bolt marks all over, and I only want to strategically turn bolt marks on where I need them. That's why I've set this to none by default. And then here on the content for sight and shot bolts, I'm basically putting in the number of bolts, the bolt diameter, and the bolt standard. And then the client doesn't want the length here because they don't necessarily want to show that here. They're going to show that in a field bolt point-to-point list. So either way, this is showing you that at the drawing level, I'm just starting with some basic settings here and no object level settings. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to showcase how to use view properties to modify these plan views. So here I'm going to go ahead and double click on the gray border that's around this specific view. And when I double click on the gray border, that opens up the view properties. Now, this dialog box again looks a little bit different than the drawing properties. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my dropdown, and you'll see that I've got a bunch of view properties prefixed with the company name and E. And the E signifies Erection Drawings. Now, the thing to understand is that in view properties, they're generic across all drawing types, which means that view properties can be used on erection drawings, single bar drawings, or assembly drawings. All of these views are generic across all drawing types. And so in the USA environment, you'll see that a lot of the assembly drawing stuff has face in the prefix. But for the customer, just so that way they don't get confused, I just basically put an E here to tell them that this is for erection drawings. Okay, detail and section are going to be for like blow up details or cutting sections like at connections and stuff. Elevation will be doing my cross elevations or cross section elevations for the entire stair. And then plan will be for plan views. So I'm just going to select on plan here. Now, the first thing I want you to see is that there is an object level settings here. And so when I go to this, you're going to see there's all my rules. So I've got a bunch of different rules that actually change the presentation of both parts. So like how certain things are presented and their color and whether hidden lines are on, that's what these rules control. And then I also have some special rules here for part marks. Like basically with the part mark for concrete, I just wanted to just include the name. And then for pans on the treads here for the stair, I actually want that to have the name and then a piece mark and not really the profile and piece mark like that's there by default. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first modify this, and then I'll come back and explain one of those rules in more depth. So I'm going to just hit OK here. And then what I'll do is I'll select on that gray view border, which I have highlighted, and then I'll press the modify button. So when I do that, you're going to see a lot of those object level settings kicking in. And now the plan view actually looks a lot better. And we can see actually the object level setting here kicking in specifically for this pan. So it's not showing the profile and the part mark. It's actually just showing the name of the part and then the piece mark there. And so that just gives you a good idea. And then here you can see that the concrete is actually just showing the name, right? So that shows you how those properties work. Now, let me just cover that again. So if I select on this here, what I can do is I can come over here first to the filter tab in the view properties. And what I did is I actually created a filter saved away here for concrete and for pans. So all of the customers' filters are here at the top. Now, there is a lot of out-of-the-box filters created already by Tekla. Let me tell you something. Tekla did a pretty big rename of all the filter names and stuff like that in 2022, and it created a lot of confusion and broke a lot of settings that I had dependencies on in the past. And so I kind of tell clients, if you're doing a lot of customization now, make all of your own names, even if you start with some of the Tekla saved away names, make all of your own names so that way your filters and everything will work in your firm folder and you don't have to worry about Tekla changing any file names. So that's actually what I've done here. So let me just go ahead and go to the SI pan. When I do that, you'll see that I'm just filtering for any part name that is called pan in the model. And that's what I'm doing basically on my pan stairs. Okay, so I filled that in. I hit save here in this particular save field, and I did not do it up here at the top. So I just basically set up a filter, hit save with that name, and now I've got the filter set. Now, I don't want to store this here, right? Like, because a lot of people by accident, when they're doing these object level settings, they'll fill these in and they press modify, or they'll press OK, or they'll hit save up here at the top. And I don't want that because then that'll filter everything out. Let me just show you what happens, for instance, if you do that. If you hit modify, then look, basically I'm just seeing everything and filtering out only things except for pans. And so if that ever happens to you, you're like, uh-oh, I kind of messed up here. What happened? Then basically what you can do is you can just undo and just cancel this dialog box. And then you can double click on your view properties again and get back into that. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So you can save away your filters for your object level settings and then just hit cancel when you're done. So right, for instance, if I just come back in here, let's say I created this filter, did a save at the top, and I hit save right here, and then I'm going to press cancel. That way I don't accidentally save my main view properties or hit modify or anything, okay? So the next thing I'm going to do is just come back into my view properties. And then what I'll do is I'll go down here to part mark, because that's actually what I was trying to control. So if I go to part mark, by default here on main parts, I'm seeing profile and then the assembly position or the assembly mark. And that's exactly what I'm seeing here from the drawing properties or the main view properties level. Okay, but I have a specific object level setting that makes the treads look differently. And that's exactly why the tread is using the name and then the piece mark, and then concrete has just a name. So let me show you that. If I come in here, I've already created this SI pan and I've saved that away. And you'll see that it's actually using the gauge user defined attribute. Then I'm calling out the name and then a new line character. And then there's like carrier bars. I actually have a couple different settings. I think I made pan specifically for blow up view. So I'll show that later. But I actually am using name and mark. So this is actually another good point. I'm actually glad this happened to me because you'll see that some of my saved properties here for like part mark and part, they don't say like pan here unless it's very specific only to pans, right? I did the same thing for this grading tread. You can actually see that I've got very specific text that the customer wants and they're like, they have to have it, but these aren't properties on those parts in the model. So I've got a very specific filter for grading treads that are 6 inches and that's what's going on here. But if I'm just more generically trying to put in the name and the mark, then I actually just call it name and mark rather than calling it pan because I might use name and mark somewhere else. So that's kind of the strategy that I tend to use. I try to stay generic about the properties that are in there rather than doing specific part names. But on filters, it's a little bit different. On filters, I do give it very specific names because I'm trying to filter out those specific objects. Okay, so going back here to part mark, I have SI, name, and mark, and that's exactly what I've got, name and mark. Now for the concrete, I'm actually just using name. So if I go to SI name, it just has name in the mark there, and that's all I've got set. Okay, so again, same thing with the filter. I want to change the settings in here, hit save inside of this panel. I don't want to hit save up on the top, okay? Because that would then unfortunately save the setting and then make everything look that way, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to fill in the settings, hit save up here after I type in a name, and I'm going to press the cancel button. And now I've got my filter saved away, I've got my part mark and my part settings saved away for object level settings, and the next step is to actually go in, back to the view properties, and then I go to the attributes tab, I go to edit settings here, add a row, and here's how these 3 columns work at the top. The first column is basically the filter. So that's exactly what I've got here. I created a pan filter. Then here in the dropdown, you're choosing what property on that part in the drawing that you want to control. Well, in this particular case, I'm trying to control the part mark because that's where I just went and made those save settings for the name and the mark, right? So I'm going to use part mark, and then these drop down of settings here in the third column are the same thing as here under part mark. They're the same as the settings that I just created and saved away here. So again, you're saving away your properties, you're saving away your filter names, and then you can map those here in the object level settings dialog box and these rules. And the rules will read from top to bottom. So the order kind of does matter, and you want the more specific or restrictive rules on the top and the more generic rules towards the bottom. Okay, so I'm just going to hit cancel here because we've already got that set, but that goes through the workflow of how you create those object level settings. And again, I'm doing that here at the view properties level. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. I've got this all set here. I'll actually just go down to my next plan. So I'll just double click on this one. And then when I open that up here, I'll just load up those same view properties that I used on the other one. And then I'll just say modify. And then you'll see that all of those settings kick in, and I'll hit cancel. And now you're going to see a little bit of variance here, right? I've got, for instance, on my stair stringer, I've got the profile and basically the piece mark. But again, for my pans, I have pan and then the piece mark, right? Because I don't really want to see that plate 16th kind of description for the profile because that'll confuse the field. All they care about is that that's a pan and what's the piece mark, okay? And so again, when I click on this, you'll see in the drawing property pane on the right, profile and assembly position, and then here, name and assembly position. And that's those object level settings kicking in. And then for the concrete over here, we can see that that's just the name in the part mark. Now, let me show you a couple of other things that I change at the view properties level that's different than the out-of-the-box Tekla settings, because this is going to happen to you and you're going to get confused of what's going on. So if I double click on the view properties here, and I actually set this up at the drawing properties level, but since I already modified this at the view properties, I'm just going to open up that view properties. So if I come here to the protection node, out of the box in a lot of the drawing settings, there's this preventing the mark from overlapping like on the part itself. And so if I modify that, you're going to see this like Christmas tree or this like fly out chia pet of like marks just going all over the place. And so that protection is trying to prevent any part marks being on top of parts. Now, this doesn't really happen so much on structural plans, The reason why it's happening so bad here, and it happens all the time with miscellaneous detailers, is because they love to model concrete for reference. They'll put in the floor slabs, or they'll put in the edge slabs, or they'll put slabs on the landing, and then you get like these marks flying out all over the place. So what I've done in my properties is I've got that turned off, and then I hit modify, and then it goes back in there. Now, another thing that I tend to come in here and mess around with is on bolt mark and part mark. I tend to go over here to the general tab, and I change a few things. You may want marks to be in all views, not just one view on the erection drawing. That's actually kind of what I had before, and I just changed that to where it's in always. So that way it's always shown in whatever view a part is actually displayed in, especially if it appears in multiple views on the same drawing. Now, the other thing here is I tend to turn the merge marks off. And a lot of people are like, why are you doing that? I actually want to merge those marks for the treads. It's because Tekla doesn't consistently do it. Sometimes it'll merge half of them, and then sometimes it'll like kind of put 2 here differently than the other 10. And then I have to kind of split them and merge them manually anyway. So I just turn this off. The other thing here is that I tend to change is sometimes I'll use this here where it'll try to align the mark with the piece, but if it's too congested, then it'll actually do the leader line and fly out, which is a lot of what I'm seeing here. See how like this here, for instance, on the rail or for the stair, it's actually aligned and fixed to the piece, but then the pans, because they're overlapping there with other marks, or there might be some issues where it can't kind of just draw that aligned, it actually just does a leader line. Now, the other thing is a lot of people ask me about the default settings where far side parts have hidden line leaders, and I don't like that, so I turn that off here. And then also, when the leader goes left and right on the text, you want the justification to always follow the leader. So I tend to switch this from left to leader line, so that way that looks nice and good, and that's how I set that. And again, I typically do that there on bolt mark and part marks. One unfortunate little bug that just constantly seems to happen, unfortunately, when you save view properties multiple times and you go in and change stuff a lot of times, is I like arrows on all my part marks, and you'll see that it's actually on there on a lot of the pieces, but it's not saved for some reason in the view properties. When you're constantly loading these properties and hitting save when you make changes, sometimes this loves to go back to just being like blank here and not having an arrow. So you just got to keep an eye on that. If you end up modifying, you're like, where the heck do my arrows go? It's just because for some reason when I hit save multiple times and doing changes, this tends to go back. It happens a lot on bolt mark, and it happens a lot on part mark. So I'm constantly having to change this. So if you make any additional changes, then you just need to make sure that those are checked and hit save over your view properties, and then you're good, and you can hit modify and it'll fix that. Okay, so there's just a couple little tricks to just be aware of related to the marks there and kind of what I do with that. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to merge the marks so that way they look a little bit better than what I'm seeing here, especially on the pans, the treads. So what I do is I come down here to the lower left-hand corner, and there is this select marks and notes and drawings. So I'll just click that button twice, and it'll deactivate everything else and only allow me to select on marks, which is really great. That's exactly what I want here. Now, I have this upper level of the stair, going up this flight here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to window around all the marks in the lower stair, so that way only those marks will merge. Now, a lot of people sit here and go, oh, hey, these are T8s and that's T4. I can't select all those and merge them. What's actually interesting, though, is this awesome merge command for the manual merge. It'll automatically detect what marks are different versus the same from what you've got selected, and you can just merge, and then it's only going to group the ones that are the same. Everything else, it'll just leave alone and not change that. So from here, you can just kind of move the marks around and change them and update them. A neat little trick that not everybody knows about is a lot of people ask me, hey, I'm dragging and dropping to move the mark, but I want to move the leader around. Well, if you just hold down shift and then drag the mark, that will allow you to actually move that around. You can also grab on the grip point and then drag that around. That's another way to do it, but it takes more time. So I just usually hold down shift and drag the mark and the leader at the same time. So there is still going to probably be a little bit of cleanup here, but it's a lot better with that merge mark. And again, I just tend to manually choose that. And then for this other stair, I can just window around these marks here, and anything that's the same, I can just say merge. And again, it found a couple pans there, and then I can merge those. Now, when I'm showing the partial plans, sometimes I don't necessarily show those marks there or have the quantity, or I'll delete one and just say, I'll go down here to the other plan view to show those marks. So you have to kind of make a determination of what's the best fit for you in that sense. Now, one thing that you have to keep in mind is that when you have changed your selection to only select marks like I have at the bottom, that's going to prevent you from actually being able to click and modify anything else. And so this happens to new users all the time. They forget that they've done that, and then they're like, oh, what's going on? Why can't I select on stuff? Just got to remember that you got to come back down here and do the select all button, and now you can select on additional elements there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a section view on this drawing. And so what I'll do is I'll go up here to views, and then I'm going to go to the section view command. Now there's a couple things that you're going to want to do this. First of all, I'm going to choose my section cut labeling settings that I want to use here. And so that's the section mark, right? Like how is the symbol actually going to be drawn when I cut the section? Then there's a view properties button over here on the right. And I've got those view properties that I can choose from that I saved. I'm going to be doing an elevation view of the stair. So I'm going to choose elevation. If I were doing more of a blow up section, like of a connection or detail, then I would use section. But here I'm using elevation. So I've got that selected. I've even got a different scale than the main plan view. So I've got that all set. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick basically from this point here, I'm going to go all the way through the stair, and that's where my view plane is going to be cut at. So I'll pick those 2 points. Then here, this is the view depth looking in basically in this direction. You can see the magenta arrows here pointing in this direction, and that's my view depth in that direction. Now this customer in particular, they tended to not do the view direction all the way through this side. So they just actually have it cut in the middle of the stair. So I'll just go ahead and click that there. And then the last thing I'll do is I'll actually just place the new section view that I've created. Now, what you'll see here is that the view properties are a little bit different. I've actually am calling out things with profile marks instead of the profile and the assembly mark, because the client here wants plan views to have their marks shown here, and they more just show the profiles and descriptions in their elevation views typically. So again, this is the advantage of setting up object level settings at the view properties level, because this is my elevation view properties, and this is my plan view properties, which have 2 different object level settings on the same drawing. Okay, so I'm going to grab this view and just drag it down, and then we'll click on one of the grips here in the magenta box around the view, and that'll allow us to actually stretch the size of that view to be a little bit larger so we can see the entire stair. So everything looks pretty good there. And again, I can just go ahead and start to do some cleanup. Let's just get rid of that. I can move around some of the callouts or the marks there, and a little bit of congestion going on down here. Again, since I'm seeing both of the stringers, I can just get rid of one of those. Hold down Shift, move that up there, just drag that there. So things aren't perfect, especially when you turn the protection off like I've done. But you'll see things overlapping parts. You got to do a little bit more cleanup and maybe deleting some duplicate marks. But you're getting pretty darn close here. And all of the properties of the way that I want these to be called out is actually done correctly, and I don't have to load up specific settings. So let me comment on that. If you don't do these object level settings, right? So if I just go back to double clicking on the view properties, the object level settings, the big advantage of these is now I've got filters and rules and different save settings that automatically make different types of parts call out exactly the way that I want. Now, it's perfectly fine that if you don't want to go through the complexity of setting those up, it will save you a lot of time if you do it. But the other strategy of what people do is they'll kind of keep generic drawing settings, exactly what I was talking about earlier, where they don't have any object level settings at the drawing level. They just set up their part mark and then their bolt mark to be very generic for 80% of the drawing. And then what they tend to do is instead of coming in here and having these already set up the way that they want, what they'll do is they'll actually save individual property levels. So you can always click on multiple marks here for individual objects, and then you can load save settings that here in the property pane. Let's say that I wanted the profile here. So I'll do profile and just say, actually that's already what's in there. Let me do profile and length and just say modify. So if I do that there, you'll see that you can just manually modify those marks. This takes you a little bit more time, but it requires less Tekla admin and less setup and not having to worry about those rules. So it's perfectly fine to do either way. One takes a little bit more longer in production and adds up over time if you don't do the object level settings. But if you're just trying to get up and going with Tekla, this is usually how I train people when they first get started, is just make some individual object level settings for different types of objects and just train users how to manually clean up the drawing and not worry about the filters when they first get started. So I just wanted to cover that you have both options. And in fact, there are some cases where even with this client, I was like, well, maybe we shouldn't make an object level setting for this because we don't typically show that there, or it doesn't happen all the time. So for instance, here on the pan, if I actually come in here and say add a mark, this is what's actually interesting is I do not have these shown. So let me actually show you what I've got going on there. I've got a specific object level setting for this. So if I double click on the view properties in this SIE elevation save view properties, here in the object level settings, I'm actually filtering out pans, and I have a saved setting to turn off the part mark. So see this SI no part mark here? Let me actually show you that. I go to part mark, and you'll see here in the settings, I've got SI no part mark. It actually has no elements in the mark for the secondary or the main part, and that's why I'm not seeing any part marks automatically shown. But I am seeing them shown, for instance, on the pipe and the stairs and other things, but I'm not seeing a whole plethora of marks appear for the part or for the pans. Now, that's why when I manually try to click on the mark or on that part here and say add mark, it's basically saying, hey, content not defined, because in the object level setting, I said not to create that actual mark and have no mark there. But if I wanted to override that, if this ever happens, this is where I can just do individual settings. So let's say that I wanted the pan settings here, which is basically, it looks like I think I was doing profile mark, so I guess I didn't make an individual one here. But let's just say I do a name to start out with, right? So I like the pan there, and then I can just add an element here. And let's see, what will I put on there? Probably put in the assembly position. So this is cool. I can just type in assembly position, add that there. I can select that, and I can even come in here and add a frame around it and just say modify, and there we go, right? And then you can see that that's under the name. And then what I could do is I could come in here and say plus SI, and then I can say name and then mark and save that away. And now I can use those settings for individual properties if I need to. So that shows you another strategy beyond just using object level settings to quickly edit your drawings. Now, another thing that this specific client said is that they don't actually want to show the grab rail or the wall rail brackets on the far side of the wall there for the stair. They just want to focus on the guardrail and the stairs themselves. And so what I can do is I can actually select on these individual wall rail brackets. And then if I just want to hide those out real quick, I can just right click and say hide from drawing view. Now I'm going to choose hide from drawing view rather than hide from drawing, because I might cut a section in here showing how the wall rail bracket is going to appear and stuff like that. And I don't want it to be hidden from other views, just this specific view. So that's the difference between hide from drawing and hide from drawing view. So hide from drawing view, and you're going to see that they're still actually there. And the reason why they're drawn like in this white invisible color is because I want to be able to select them and right click and say show in drawing view if I want to bring them back. Okay. If you press the B key, so B as in boy on your keyboard, that's going to actually toggle you between color and black and white with pen weights. Press B again, it's now black and white with no pen weights. B again, and you're back to color. So when you're in black and white mode, it'll actually show you exactly what you're going to see when you print this out to like PDF. That's not going to be shown because it's hidden. And then you can also see the pen weights are kicking in here based on the colors. So then I'll just hit B and go back to color, and that shows you how to manage hiding specific objects in certain drawing views. Now, this particular customer likes to actually show reference text underneath their callouts, as well as do the bubbles here, even for their main plan views. So basically, if I click on the view properties here, or on that title or the gray border, it's going to show the property pane on the right. So to quickly edit those, like for instance, here I've got 1 and 1, but this one here actually needs to be plan 2 on E1. And so I can just click here in the property panes. And if you just click in there and then backspace, hit 2, and then say modify, now that's changed. And then I can do the same thing here. So if I just click inside that reference text, I can just say S1, S2 or something like that, or whatever the design drawing references are, and then just say modify, and then there we go. So that's actually a lot easier than earlier versions of Tekla, because now I can just get right to those without having to click through 3 dialog boxes to get there and modify those or put text underneath there manually. So that's pretty handy there. So I've got that set. I got 1 and 2. And if I was going to actually leave this elevation view on this drawing, I probably would change this section. So I would change this 1, 1. I can see the actual call out here, and I can drag that section in a little bit. I would actually change this to 2 if I'm going to leave that on the same drawing. actually, sorry, I would change that to 3 and modify that because I've got 1 and then I've got 2 and then this would be number 3 on this drawing. Now, I'm not going to actually do that here because I'm going to move this to another drawing, but I'll just say, you know what? Actually, I'll take that back. I'm going to do sections and details on a separate sheet. And so I'll just leave this here. We'll do 3. And then one last thing I actually want to show is that what this customer wants is they're like, okay, hey, this is the same stair, and this section 3 is actually going to be used on both, and I want it cut basically in both plan views. Now, I don't want to create that view a second time. So instead, what we'll do is we'll go over here to the annotations tab. And if we're not cutting an additional section, we're just putting a mark there to reference an existing section, we'll use the section name here. And then basically what I can do is I can just pick basically my 2 points here to define that section mark. And it just puts in the mark only, and it's the same as that one up there, but it doesn't cut an actual additional section. And so that's essentially what I'm taking care of or doing there. Now, one other small tip that I do is that a lot of people ask me, hey, I've got this grid line 6, for instance, here, and I want that to be aligned. So what I can actually do is select on this view, I can right click and I can choose this align vertically option. So Tekla is going to say pick the base point. So I'm just going to pick nearest here along grid line 6 in that first view, and then I'll pick it in the second view, and it actually moves the views over so that way they're aligned basically here on those 2 points that I picked. And then that basically aligns the stair and makes it look a little bit more clean and consistent from one plan view to the next. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a blow-up detail view here at the base connection. To do that, I'll go to the Views tab here, and I'm going to use Detail View. So when I activate that, I'm going to start with Detail Mark, and maybe I'll start with Standard. And the customer likes to use numbers here, so I'm just going to start with a number 1. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come over here to the View Properties tab, and I'm going to choose the SIE detail because this is for a blow-up detail. And you can see the scale is 1 inch equals a foot here. Okay, now the other thing is I've changed a couple things. One other setting here, I just want to see if I can quickly find it. It's actually on the detail mark, sorry. I'm choosing a detail boundary of rectangle. Tekla's out of the box detail settings are going to be circular. I tend to use rectangle, and I also change the line type usually to hidden just so it looks a little bit better. And I can kind of fit more blow-up views and things like that, especially on plans. But watch this. I'm just going to pick this corner and then this corner here. Then the third point is going to be where my detail mark callout is going to be. And then the last point I pick is actually locating where basically that detail view is going to be. So that says detail 1 on E1. And again, you can see that hidden line box there. And now I see that blow up here down at the left. Now, there's a couple different strategies. Some people in these view properties, so if I just double click on this, some people go down the strategy on the part mark of actually saying none here. And what they do is basically it doesn't have any part marks turned on at all. The content is actually there, such as profile, like on the main part or the secondary part. So you could, if none of the marks were there, you can actually click on a part and say right-click, add mark using view properties, and it would show up. And they tend to have everything off by default and choose what they want turned on. Now, there's nothing wrong with that strategy because you'll have less stuff that's on your drawing that may not matter to this particular detail of what you're trying to communicate. But you also might forget something. So that's kind of the trade-off. The people that want their view properties to have the marks off by default and turn them on themselves, they may forget something. Then there's the flip side of that coin. If I have all the marks on here by default, then I'm getting a little bit more stuff on here, and then I may need to choose certain things that I actually want to delete or remove, okay, or move more things around. So for instance here, like if I don't really care about showing about the stud wall, I don't care to show about the stringer or anything like that. I may not even care about the brackets because you'll see here are the carrier bars. We've actually got a object level setting in these blow up view properties that specifically use the gauge value. So let me actually show you that. But and I could have even made a setting here that filters for the brackets themselves and actually removes those part marks. And I'll actually probably show you that. So I'll do one setting there and it gives a good example of that. But what I want you to see here is if I go to part mark, by default in here, profile is shown, but this is clearly more than just profile. So what I did is I actually made some save settings in here specifically for pans. So here's part mark settings that uses the gauge UDA. It has the name, a new line character, and then I just put text in here with carrier bars. Okay. And then if I go up here to attributes, I can go to edit settings, and you can see that I'm using this filter of SI pan. I'm controlling the part mark, and then I'm using those save part mark settings, which make that look like that. Now, let's say that I actually come in here and add a row, and I've actually already got a filter created for the brackets because I'm filtering that out in another location. And I'm going to control the part mark here, and I think I've got an SI no part mark. So if I actually turn that on, and then I select on that view and say modify, you'll see that those bracket marks go away. So you can actually strategically turn certain part marks off in your view properties if you want to. So notice here that I've got different object level settings in this blow up view than I have in my main plan view, as well as my main elevation view. And this is the power of object level settings and just good Tekla setup. It can decrease the production time on your drawings by if you just use the out of the box settings, we're talking like 20% of your time can be like saved by just having good object level settings. All right, so that shows you how that works. I'm going to say apply and OK. And then if I want to update these view properties so that way that's always in there, then I can just hit save, and then it's going to remember those object level settings that I had just set up there. And again, just keep an eye out on this little issue here where sometimes bolt mark and part mark don't save the arrow, just like I'm seeing here. So I just need to watch out for that. And sometimes when I do this here, it tends to grab it more where it selects all these. I just want to make sure that's set, hit save, and just something to keep an eye on. Because here I can see, for instance, bolt mark did not have the leader and I wanted that. So I'll just say modify, and then it comes back, and then we've got that set up there. Oh, I just actually ran into a small little thing that I probably didn't want. So again, watch this. I had loaded up this SI pan settings here, and it had that, and then it basically made all the part marks that, and that's not what I wanted. So watch this. Let me just undo that. So that way I'm back to, there we go, back to where I was with the view properties before. And I'll load up just some different settings here, go back to E-detail, and then, okay, so I accidentally saved here with the basically these additional names, like that specific filter in there, and I didn't want that, right? So let me basically close out of there. I'll then double click back into the detail, and then it should have just profile in there again, right? If I go back to attributes, let's just see, I've got the bracket and no part mark. That actually looks good. So everything is set there very nicely. Let me just go back to part mark, and then I'll just make sure that's set. Bolt mark. Okay, that wasn't set, so I'll select that, and then I'll check all these. But I just want to make sure back here on the, on part mark, that it is just using profile. Good. So what I'm showing you here is that I accidentally did a save up here on the top with one of those other settings like loaded, and then it caused my view properties to be messed up. So those are the gotchas that I was trying to help prevent when you're doing object level settings. But I think I've got everything set here now. I'm going to hit save. And now if I just hit modify here, we should see the leader appear on our bolt mark, and then we're all good to go. And again, if there's just some marks that you don't need in there, you can either set up an object level setting like I did, or you can just create a filter there, whatever you want to do. And then here I'm just kind of stretching these marks around. If I want this to just be up here so it's out of the way, there we go. Basically here within a couple of seconds, you've got everything all cleaned up and you're all set. Now let's say that I want to make a section here in this detail. So I'll go to section view, and I'll start here in section mark, and I'll just say standard or load up whatever properties that I want. I'll then go to view, and in here I'm going to go ahead and use my section settings. Now, believe it or not, this is almost identical to the detail settings. The only difference here is that I'm using this view name dash view name for the label rather than detail and the view name. And you'll see what I mean by that here in a second. So I've got basically those view properties set. I'm now just going to pick like 2 points here, and I'll set the depth and the viewing direction. And then what we'll do is we'll just place that section over here to the right. Okay, so now when I've done that, you're going to see here that it shows that section, and basically it's doing that view label of 2-2. Now it looks like I've got some cleanup to do here of just kind of decreasing the view depth. So I'll just stretch the magenta lines here, or the grips, and then I can kind of just clean up and remove some things that I don't really need to call out here. So that just shows you how to do a section, and really I just wanted to mainly explain in that the difference between, say for instance here, the detail view call out. So when I click on this, the save settings for E detail is basically going to have this in the label, detail, text, and then view name. But on section, it's going to be view name dash view name. And so that's just pretty important to kind of see there. Now, I've got those details in those sections kind of created. And the next step is that I would actually move those over to a sections and details sheet. Okay, so I'm going to close out my main erection drawing here. And then I will go to the Create GA drawing. I'm going to switch this to Empty Drawing, Drawing Properties. I'm going to load up either standard, or I'll just load up this SI erection drawing. I'm going to set this to E2, and I'm going to say that this is Sections and Details. I'll apply those settings here at the bottom, and then I'll check the Open Drawing option and say Create. And now there's just an empty erection drawing with no views on it. So that's perfect. That's where I'm going to move my sections and details to. So I'll close that down. I'll go back in here to Document Manager. And then basically what I do is I will see that there's the E2 sheet that I just created. Now I'm going to go back up here to E1. I'll leave the Document Manager open, and I'm actually going to select the E2 drawing in the Document Manager. Then what I'll do is I'll select on these detail views. Now, I'm doing this on purpose so you can see, because you're going to try to do this and it won't work, where you select more than one detail at a time and try to do the move, and it's not going to happen. So you have to pick one view at a time, have the drawing that you want to move this view to, and you right-click and say Move to Drawing. Then there's this little prompt that comes up and you just say Move. Then you select on this one and you right-click and you say Move to Drawing. Move. And then it tells you in the Document Manager that, hey, some links of the drawings have been updated. And what we should see here is that this is actually saying that this is detail 1 on E2 now. So that's awesome. It actually updated the reference. So I'm going to go back in here. I'll just save my drawing. Now, when you do move the details, they tend to go exactly where they were on the source sheet. So I'm just going to select on these two here, and I'm just going to move them up to the top. And then there we go. We have detail 1 on E2 here, and basically section 2 that's also here on E2 is also displayed. So that shows you how you can basically move these two details over to this sheet. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show the egress direction here on the stair. So what I'll do is I'll just go up to my drawing tab here at the top. I'll go to line, and I've already got some saved properties here called upline. And so it fills in a darker color. It sets the arrow and the position of the arrow to the right. So I'm just going to go ahead and pick right here, and then I'll just go perpendicular. And then there we go. There's that line. And again, let me actually just probably do that here. So I'll probably do this, and I tend to go all the way across there just to kind of clue in that this is basically like it's a partial view of the next flight of stair going up. Then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go over here to Annotations tab, and I'll go to Text, and I've got a up and an up 90 basically set up here. So if I load that up, it's again blue, a little bit larger size, 5/32 for the text, and then I'll just pick that there, and then I'll pick that there, and there we go. Now we've got those. So again, I chose the blue because if I hit B here, you'll see that the pen weight is pretty heavy for that, so that way it pops out or sticks out there. Again, we can just kind of move that there. All right, so now we've got that done. The other thing that some people do is they like to show a break line here. So if I come over here to the Applications and Components panel and I just type in break line here, there's the rectangular break line. I can just double click on that. And then basically if I activate that here, I can pick these 2 points, and then there's that break line actually drawn in there. And you can change the color if you want to, or just change the presentation. So this is actually using polyline settings and polygon settings to actually draw this. So you have to control the color and stuff inside of these saved settings for that. But let's actually just change maybe the size of the extension here. So maybe I'll pop that out to an 1/8 and say modify. And again, if I want that to be my standard, I can just come up here and save that as standard, put that in my firm folder, and then that way it's going to always be that way going forward. So there you go. That shows you how you can basically do like a break line to show that that's a partial view of the stair going up there. Okay, so the last thing we'll do here is we'll put in some basically our riser and run dimensions and the nosing line. So I'll just go to line here on the drawing tab, and I'm going to choose my nosing line option, which does a little bit of a heavier line, but it does this line type here for the nosing line. I'll just pick from there up to here, and there is our nosing. So again, if I do B on my keyboard, you can see that. Some people actually choose a little bit different style. Maybe they'll use like the center option here, modify. That way it's a little bit different than the hidden lines, whatever you want to do. So let's say I want to choose that there. I can just go ahead and save those settings. So let's actually just switch that to center, hit save on that, and now I can use that going forward. Now the next step is I'm going to come up here to dimensioning. I'm going to go to horizontal dimension. I've got some save settings here for doing combined dimensions. And the key thing here is that down here on the bottom, it's saying combine equal dimensions. So it says this many spaces at this spacing equals the total distance. So it's a little bit tedious, but I can come in here and actually just click on each of these. Now, if you actually accidentally screw up and you're like, hey, I'm 5 or 6 of these in, no problem. Just hit backspace on your keyboard and that will undo your last pick. So basically you just go through here, you add all of these points. Again, a little bit tedious to just kind of go through there and do that. But we'll just get those there. And then what we can do is we can middle mouse button here to place that. And now we see 12 at 11 equals 11 foot. And there is our total run. And you can repeat that same process there for doing your risers. Now, if I want to do a bevel dimension for the stair, what I tend to do is I'll come up here to dimensions, and then there's this angle dimension. And in the properties, I like to use bevel here. And I tend to use this triangle with degrees, so that way I've got the angle and the bevel. And this, the bevel like symbol actually tends to mess people up quite a bit. So let me show you what I do. So I'm going to pick nearest here because Tekla at the lower left-hand corner says pick the angle vertex. So that's like the vertex of our angle or bevel. Then what I do is I have ortho on. So O down here is on for ortho. If I press O, sorry, it's actually right here. If I press O, it turns it off. But if I press O again, and now ortho's on, and you'll see that it hits in that 90-degree symbol. And I just go straight up and down, and I just click a point in space. Now, if Tekla won't let you click a point in space, it's probably because you don't have the free placement dimension or snap to any position here. So I just have this on, so that way I can just kind of do ortho and pick somewhere on the drawing. Now, the last point here says pick a second point on the line. So I'm going to go ahead and pick right here, and there we go. There's my bevel. Now, if you go along the second line, you'll see that the bevel symbol is going to be placed along that. If you actually go along the first line you pick, it's going to draw just like an offset line there, so that way the bevel's a little bit away from the stair. I can't get rid of that line there, but at least it kind of pulls it off the stair a little bit. So that's how you can quickly go ahead and place in your bevel. So I know this was a little bit of a longer video, but I hope it shows the power of good drawing settings. And again, for miscellaneous steel, the strategy here was, just in summary, that I started with some very generic base settings here, didn't do any object level settings on the drawing properties level, but I just did set up part marks and bolt marks and things for what I want on 80% of my views. And then from there, I set up very specific view properties that have the object level settings in them for the specific use case or purpose of those views. So here I have elevation view, over here I have plan views, and then I had my blow up sections and details. And again, here on the attributes tab underneath edit settings, you can see that I've got all of these different filters saved away, and then I can save different properties for part marks and part or bolt marks, and then I can tie those to those filters to make specific objects be called out or look a different way based on different views. So again, here, this just shows you the power of the setup. And this is what I usually do. I come out with clients, they have me come out on site, and we go through their setup. We look at example drawings of how they want the drawings to look. And then we just go through each of these settings, save this away in their firm folder, and then they're up and running.